Hello and Moadim L'Simcha. I have here my copy of the Torah, Orach Chaim, Hilchot Sukkah, and the first paragraph, the first siman, begins B'Sukkot Teshvu Shevat Yamim Laman Yidu Derotechem Ki B'Sukkot Oshavti Et Bnei Yisrael V'Otzia Otam Me'eretz Mitzrayim Dalak Katuv Mitzvot Sukkah B'Yitzet Mitzrayim, and he goes on a very long siman on the what you call a midrash, on the rationale behind the mitzvah of sukkah. Something very unusual for the Torah. The Torah is many of you know, is a book of halacha, of minhag. It's the model and the antecedent for the Shulchan Aruch, and it's full of practical rules and regulations. It's not a book of drush and philosophy. And the Bayit Chadash, one of the important major commentaries on the Torah, notices this, and he tells us that it's not the custom, the habit of the Torah to go into the rationale behind the commandments, and he tells us basically that this Laman Yedu Dorotechem Laman, the reason for doing this, basically tells us that this commandment, the commandment of eating in the sukkah, requires kavanah. When we go into the sukkah and eat there, or talk there, or learn there, or sleep there, we have to have in mind the reason why we're doing this, which is to remember the sojourn after we left Egypt. And he says that there are several other mitzvot that have leman, that tell us explicitly the rationale, and that these all require the proper intent when performing the mitzvah. We have it's a very well-known sugya, well-known issue in Jewish legal theory, whether the commandments require the intent. You have to think beforehand why you're doing the mitzvah, what the reason for the mitzvah is, and most people think that mitzvah inan tzrichot kavana, that if you do the mitzvah even though you're daydreaming or just not thinking about the reason why, you've still performed the commandment. But even so, there are several mitzvot where the whole meaning of the mitzvah, the whole mitzvah has no substance other than the intent. For example, shofar, it's just a sound. It could just be a sound, another sound in the background in our noise-filled universe. But if you hear the shofar and you intend when hearing it to fulfill the commandment of hearing shofar, and you've kept the mitzvah. And the Bayit Chadash shows us that from the point of view of the Torah, these mitzvot, the few of them, including Sukkah, which the Torah says Laman Yidu Dorotechem, mean that they have to be done with the proper intent, to remember that this mitzvah is done to recall our sojourn in the desert, where we lived in these huts, in these booths, for 40 years until we entered Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, and so now here I am up in our sukkah with the latest decoration behind me, a panel, the painting of the 12 tribes done by my son and Amos and my wife. Rabbeinu Hananel says in his in connection to the Gemara and Sukkah that one of the reasons we eat in the Sukkah is to stimulate the children to ask. They'll say, Mommy, Daddy, why aren't we eating in the dining room tonight? Why are we going out into this little hut that we built? And this is an excuse or a stimulus to tell them the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, just like as of course you all know on the night of the Seder, where we do all sorts of odd, unusual things, so the children will ask, and that gives us a prompt to tell them the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim is intimately connected to the mitzvah of Sukkah, and in fact, it's not just Sukkah, it's not just Sukkot. All of our holidays, and the Kiddush of all of our holidays, not just the three major festivals, Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuot, but also Rosh Hashanah. We say Zechel Yetziat Mitzrayim, and Shabbos. is also Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, as it says even in the Ten Commandments. So Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, to remember the story, our national narrative, which we consider to be not a literary construct, but a true, accurate, precise narration of historical events that took place and whose story is transmitted from generation to generation, from the generation that left Egypt down to our day and will continue to transmit on, is an essential, integral part of Jewish identity. So now I just moved the other side of the table so you can see another panel with a painting done by Amos a few years ago of the 7 species, Shivat Aminim. Now some authorities, when they hear, who looked into the passage from the Torah that I cited earlier, and Simon and Rushim, ask the question, well, if Sukkot is Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, if Sukkot comes to commemorate our leaving Egypt, then why isn't it in Nisan? Why is it 6 months later? And they give, all sorts of answers, but I think the question and the answers are superfluous. As I said in the previous segment, all of our festivals are Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, all of our sacred time, if you want to say, like at Rosh Hashanah and Shabbos, are also Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. We make this a part of all of our celebrations, and these festivals also have other aspects as well. Sukkot is Chag HaSif. It is a harvest festival. The Rambam explains this in the Moreh Nevuchim, and so also Shavuot Chag HaKatzir. It's a harvest of the wheat. The only festival that is specifically and totally dedicated to Yetziat Mitzrayim is Pesach, and that's why it takes place in Nisan. That's why we actually reenact parts of the Exodus. It's a performance because that's really the only reason for the festival. The other festivals have other rationales as well, but all of them combine to talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim, which is an essential point of our narrative. We are the people who began with Avraham, who found God on his own, through his own intellectual curiosity and investigations, formed a spiritual community of people committed to monotheism, but also to social justice and leading decent lives, regulated, regimented lives, not doing whatever they wanted. We went down to Egypt, where we nearly lost everything because we were assimilated to the depravity of Egypt. And then, miraculously, God took us out of Egypt and brought us to the land that was promised to us, the people of Israel, the Jewish people. And this is our national story. It's not a literary construct. It's not a convenient fiction. It's not propaganda. It's true historical fact. There is such a thing as truth as opposed to lies. There is such a thing as history as opposed to fable. And there is such a thing as in our national narrative, which we recite and which we transmit from generation to generation, is true and accurate, and is transmitted from generation to generation. That's why we have to be so punctilious about all the details. This is the only way to make sure that the narrative that's transmitted from generation to generation is the same narrative. Some of our enemies through the generations have tried to destroy us, have tried to simply kill us. Some have tried to challenge and put the lie to our narrative, and some have done both. They at the same time say we're not really the people that left Egypt and were given the land of Israel, and we're the Jews, and so there's no reason not to kill us, because when it comes to anti-Semites, the law of contradiction does not apply. I remember in my youth people who could in the same breath say the Holocaust never happened and Hitler should have killed all of you. There's no law of contradiction. When you're dealing with oppressing the Jewish people, everything goes. But we are steadfast. We maintain our tradition. We Laman Yedu Dorotechem. We pass on from generation to generation the same true narrative and reenact it in different ways in the night of Pesach by acting like free people who've finally won their freedom after slavery, and Pesach in Sukkot by moving into the same booths that our forefathers and foremothers and ancestors lived in when they were passing through the desert on their way to our homeland in Israel. So thank you very much. Simcha v'shana tova.